Kathy, are you really in Maine, or is that just a feint?
What's that again, Laura?
Kathy Rim's here, and she's got a background that makes me think maybe she's not in California right now.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That almost looks like, I don't know, Lake Tahoe or something.
That actually is the view from my new office at my house in Maine. It's a background, but it's a picture I took about a week and a half ago.
Oh, you were up in Maine?
Yes, I am.
You travel from one side of the country to the other.
I moved from one side of the country to the other. I am now
did?
a permanent telecommuter working from the East Coast instead of the West Coast.
Ah. So you get
Kathy, where in Maine are you?
I'm mid-coast area, Belfast.
Very familiar with it.
Up the coast.
My brother lived in Belfast for a little while.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I grew up outside of Boston.
My house is, the lake that you're seeing is Swan Lake. So my house is actually in Swanville, but it shares a zip code with Belfast. I've owned this house since 1985 and gratefully didn't sell it when I moved to California 15 years ago because it's worked out really nicely that I can come back here.
Well, that's
very nice.
Glad to hear it. Yeah, Maine's a beautiful state. We've been up there before.
Lots of great riding here.
Oh,
Winters aren't so great, but other things are good.
Well, I loved Acadia National Park when I was up there on the bike. This was about 10 years.
I'm about an hour and 15 minutes away from there, depending on what time of year it is. In the summertime, it takes longer because there's a lot more traffic on the roads.
I can understand that.
Do you have to shovel your roof off up there?
I don't have to shovel the roof. I've got some metal roof on the parts that don't have too much slope on them, and then the main peak of the house is really steep, so it's generally not an issue. I had a deck that required shoveling, but the deck had to be removed. It was getting pretty old, so it's going to be replaced in the springtime if all goes well. But that does have to be shoveled so that you don't get too much weight on it.
Yeah, one of my friends lives up in Maine in Portland Bangor area, and they say they have to shovel the roof off anytime it snows.
Yeah, before we bought this house, I lived in an older house where you did have to shovel off some of the roof. Yeah.
Kathy, are you from the Northeast up there in Maine?
I'm originally from New York State, and then my family moved to Maine when I was a teenager, so I lived here actually most of my life. And then when I was mid-40s, late 40s, I don't know, however old I was, 15 years ago anyway, MSF offered me a job, and I took it.
And now you're going to telecommute, huh?
Yeah, well, I have been since March, so what difference does it make if I'm going to do it from California or from Maine? And if I do it from Maine, I don't have to pay the rent on an apartment that I've been paying in California, which was double what my mortgage is on this house here.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine that. California's expensive to live in.
It sure is, and Orange County in particular, because you're near the ocean, near the beach cities, so that jacks the rent up. So it's either expensive rent, 2-hour commute, neither one's great.
So you're basically a true maniac.
You know what? I have got a hat from the Maniacs, the 101st Air National Guard Wing, that says Maniac right on it.
Well, now we got somewhere to visit next time we're in New England, or that part of New England.
There you go. I know where the good roads are.
Hey, why don't we all take a bike trip up to Kathy's house next summer sometime? Tell us all the roads and where to get all the lobster.
Hey, you know what? Believe it or not, back in the day, I used to lobster fish. My now ex-husband was a third-generation lobsterman, and we used to go fishing. So I had a lobster license and used to haul traps.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I remember when we went to Maine on a bike trip. This is 6, 7, 8 years ago. at least. And we pretty much every restaurant we stopped at or place we stayed, we could get some sort of any kind of fish. We wanted them. I think it was mostly lobster.
Well, if you search for a company called Young's Lobster Pound, that's the ex-family's business, and they've been around for decades. But it's kind of warehouse style, picnic style, but it's a wharf right out over the water with tanks of live lobsters right in the building. You can sit on a picnic table, you can pick out your own lobster, watch them cook it, and then eat on a picnic table looking out over Penobscot Bay.
Kathy, what city was that in?
Belfast?
Pardon?
Belfast?
That almost sounds like familiar that we might have went through Belfast up there when we were there 6-7 years ago.
If you went up Route 1, you probably did.
Yeah. And that was a great trip up there to the Northeast. We did that bike trip back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, good riding up here.
Bit of a stunned silence here. It's Duncan. I thought I'd drop in, having had such a great time last time.
Awesome. It's so good to see you here again. We loved what you talked about last time. I think that was just really interesting and useful for all of us. So thank you. I'm glad to see you back.
Well, I enjoyed myself so much last time, but the last 2 weeks I've been out and about. And in fact, I thought I'd talk to you about, just mention what I did last week, which I think I certainly know Don was a bit green with envy when I was telling him about what I was doing. But I've been out in our Alpine region doing motorcycle audits. So that actually involves riding popular motorcycle routes and recording them and looking at the potential danger spots for riders. So it's been really interesting. So about, I've got to convert it here, about 3,000 kilometres over 2 days. So it was my brain's a bit much to convert that to miles. Yeah, it was a fair amount of riding, very, very interesting scenery and some very treacherous roads for riders because there's lots of corners that kind of sneak up on you and very, very difficult for inexperienced riders. So high crash rates, roads, obviously. So yeah, that's been a fun week.
How is it that you come to have that work? Is that like a government program that commissions that, or who's the?
Yeah, I do lots of odd consultancy stuff. So this particular work, I subcontract to an engineering firm that gets contracts for government, and basically the audit program, there's two sorts of audits. Audits where they're intending to do some upgrades, where they're looking at what are the areas, like you might have a 200-mile section of road that's just essentially a large number of sharp corners, and it's a very popular motorcycle route because it might be going through a national park or somewhere very pleasant. And so it's got a high crash rate for motorcyclists, and they want to look at where are the danger spots, because obviously government and any road authority has a limited amount of money. And so when they actually put some work into a program to reduce crashes for motorcyclists, what they do is they really need to identify the high risk areas. And so I'll ride the route and I'll identify the worst areas for motorcyclists. The other sort of work is where they've actually done treatments and it's just measuring the consistency of the treatments. So for example, one of the routes I did recently, there was a big disparity between the advisory speed limits for certain curves. So you could have a curve that was signposted, say, 45 kilometres an hour. So let's say it had an advisory of, say, 20 miles an hour on it or something like that. And that advisory, you might be able to take that particular corner at third gear, 10 kilometres, 10 miles an hour over the advisory, but the next corner with the same advisory sign was, a hairpin bend that you were lucky to take it 10 kilometres. So there's a lot of inconsistency in signage, and that's something that catches motorcyclists out, particularly where they get in a rhythm of seeing these advisory signs and assuming that all the corners are consistent, and then there's a sign that's inconsistent and the corner's a lot tighter than they anticipate. So there's also other things that I find interesting too, because we have, I don't know if you call them chevrons there as well. They're large posts that have signs, it's like big arrows to tell you the tightness of the curve. Yeah, those things, yeah. And what's interesting is that a lot of the posts for chevrons work all right if you're high up in in something like an SUV or a light commercial vehicle, something that's like a bit of a pickup truck or something where you're a bit higher up. You can actually see these advisory curve chevrons early because the posts are quite short. But if you're on a cruiser or a lower type bike, you don't see them until you're right on top of the curve because there's a crest in front of it. So it's really interesting to look at different corner information and road information based on the rider's height and perspective, because obviously an adventure bike is going to give you a lot more vision than a cruiser. And it may only be that your head is, or maybe it's a foot in difference. If you're down here on a cruiser or on an adventure bike, you're sitting up here, but that foot in height difference can mean 200 or 300 metres or yards of vision up the road for different riders. So it's really interesting because in Australia, they design roads around what they call the 85th percentile vehicle, which is, most countries use a concept like this where it's the average family car. But we all know that the average family car performs very differently to the motorcycle, and motorcycles are all different. A sports bike or a dirt bike or a cruiser or a touring bike are all different handling characteristics. And so I've been pushing for years that we should be designing roads for, if you like, the lowest common denominator, the person who has the greatest risk. And there's a lot of evidence when they've done specific black spot programs for treatments to address motorcycle safety, that's actually resulted in a much greater improvement of safety for all road users. So there's a bit of a saying down here that motorcyclists are the canary in the mine, where if there's a problem with the road, we'll be the first ones to show you there's a problem there. So yeah, that was my week.
Do you mind telling us what you were riding this week, Duncan? Because that looked like pretty nice ride.
Yeah, I did that audit on a Ninja 1000 SE, which is my daily ride, which is it's a Kawasaki. What more can you say? Perfect motorcycle. I've got green blood. It's obvious. See? Yeah, I love my Team Green toys. I alternate between, pure sports bikes and sports tourers and adventure bikes. I keep buying different things because I don't think, life's too short to have one motorcycle, and and I'm too poor to have lots of them. so I can't. I'd love to have 6 in the stable. It'd be nice to have a cruiser and a sports bike and a track bike and but at the moment I've only got 3, so I feel a bit. It's a bit hard. But
that also means 6 to maintain. That's the thing I don't want to have to do.
Yeah, well, I totally hear you there, because our registration costs are extremely expensive, and so, you know, some jurisdictions, some countries around the world have all the insurance tied to the rider, where you know, it doesn't matter what bike you ride, the insurance goes with you. But in Australia, unfortunately, our insurance is connected to the vehicle. So even though I don't get out on my dirt bike very much, I still have to pay $700 a year to keep it registered. So that's a lot, because my dirt bike's a little 250 two-stroke. And so every year I go, do I want to pay all that money again? But I always do. So, yeah, it's one of those things. I think, you know, there's so many different bikes out there, and they all have their own enjoyment. You know, I've ridden big cruisers and I just love those, and I've ridden, you know, track bikes and I love those. So life's too short. That's a problem. So I might add, though, it's a very good bike to do audits on. I've set up a Garmin video. I've made a special bracket that sits right on the front of the bike, and it's rock solid stable. So it doesn't matter what speed I do. The footage that I take is very stable, and the particular unit I use tracks all the GPS information, so it can give me acceleration, deceleration, bank angle, coordinates. And so with the audio that goes through my helmet comms, I'm able to basically say, okay, this pothole here, or this curve, or this bit of safety barrier. But the bike is really good in that it's very much the perfect weight for doing this sort of work, because a lot of the littler bikes, if I was doing it on a sports bike, they would tend to bounce around a lot, and because they haven't got the stability that we're talking a bike that's just over 200 kilograms, so I don't know what that is in pounds, but so it's a fairly heavy bike, but it just makes it good and stable for these audits, because they're big kilometres, big distance travels, and comfortable too. I mean, I'm happy to, you know, let me convert it here. I do 500 miles in a day, so that's quite comfortable.
So you said earlier 3,000 kilometers was your distance, and that is 1,864 miles US.
Yeah, so I did that over 3 days. Yeah. So thanks for the conversion. I actually grew up on miles, but I'm actually better at converting miles into kilometers than I am kilometers back into miles. But I still think feet and inches, which is proper measurement.
If I remember right, 1 kilometer equals about a half a mile.
Yeah, so 10 miles is about 16 kilometers all up. So I always think about it when you're doing, you know, when you're a young naughty motorcyclist and you try and get your motorcycle up to the ton and do the 100 mile an hour. See, it sounds faster on a metric because you're doing 160 kilometers an hour. So that's the conversion factor. If you're doing 100, doing the ton miles, you're doing 160k an hour. So, but not that I'm that naughty anymore.
You talked about using a two-stroke 250 for off-road. Is that common in Australia to use 2 strokes versus 4 strokes?
My 2-stroke's very old. It's a 98 model. It's a Honda CRM. What happened, and I suspect the exact same happened in America, and certainly you know, during the 80s and 90s, 2-strokes ruled all our bush tracks because they were just so much lighter and more powerful. But our emission laws and our noise restrictions started putting more pressure on 2-strokes, and people started moving towards 4 strokes. And now with the lighter, more powerful 4-strokes that are out there, I would say probably 80% of dirt bikes now are 4-stroke. there are, you know, manufacturers like KTM still make a few. KTM and Hussenberg we still import a few two-strokes in those, but they're all small capacity, you know, 150, 200 capacity. Whereas the majority of our dirt bikes that people ride are larger capacity four-strokes, like 400s or 450s. And, you know, you get people into the 600s because I used to do a bit of desert racing, and you know, when you're going across large distances, you really need the 600s and the larger capacity dirt bikes. So yeah, I think four-strokes basically have taken over, but I still love my two-stroke just because I'm, you know, hoon. But I think for a motorcycle coach, it's important to actually get familiar with all the different types of riding, be it cruising or sports riding or dirt riding. They all have their own. I say to new coaches that they need to be bilingual. You have to be able to speak fluent dirt and road, because we get a lot of country areas where you'll get a class that's half people that are getting a bike license to commute or ride, you know, as a daily ride on the public street. And then there's a lot of people that are also getting a license so they can ride legally in state forests and national parks and the like, because you still need a license and a registered bike to actually operate in those areas unless it's private property. So it's really interesting because I think a lot of coaches fall into the mistake of just talking about their own riding experience and saying, certainly when it comes to things like how you set up your bike posture and use of controls, because, you know, for example, if you're a road bike, we talk about, you can't see me, but relaxed arm position. And you talk about that sort of position to a dirt rider and they just laugh at you because they know you've got to ride in the attack position with your elbows much higher. And it's the same thing with things like use of how many fingers. You know, we always teach 4 fingers for brake, and dirt riders just look at you stupid and go, well, you know, that's never going to work in the dirt because I've actually got to grip the bars and have them not pulled out of my hands as the thing's shaking. So I think our big mistake is a lot of coaches say everything's black and white, but really there's advantages and disadvantages in everything. So there's an advantage of 4-finger braking, but in some contexts there's a disadvantage of it, and there's an advantage in 2-finger braking. So, you know, there's nothing black and white in motorcycling. There's always an exception to the rule.
We've had these kind of discussions with text back and forth after our meeting. My question to you is, do you feel like the preponderance of coaches in Australia have that problem or not?
I think all over the world, wherever we are, whether we're talking as Australia, America, Europe, whatever, I think we lack ongoing professional development. And that's not just rider trainers, but driving instructors. And I think our industry does very little to support its own. I've seen some really good examples of organisations that do it well. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is a blanket thing. There are a lot of organisations that I've seen that do exceptionally good professional development. But I think there's a lot of people that have got a very narrow paradigm on what they're delivering. They have this very narrow viewpoint and think that the way they do it is the only way. I went and had a look at some rider training in Japan back in the early 2000s. And I brought some of that stuff back to Australia and talked about it, and people just were horrified. And I said, well, there's some real advantages in what they do, and you just can't throw it out because it's different. You've got to analyse it and say, okay, why is that working over there, and what parts of it can we use here? And we have a lot of debate around which foot you put on the ground when you stop. You know, our police are trained to stop with their left foot up on the gear change, and we teach in rider training to stop with the right foot up on the rear brake so you can do hill starts and move off quickly. But each has an advantage and a disadvantage, and there's no right way. You know, each just has its benefits and application for certain situations. So I think, you know, I think we just need to have a more analytical mind rather than just be steadfast in our ways and not question things.
Can you give me an example, or give us an example of what you're talking about that you brought from Japan back to Australia that caused the uproar?
Well, one of the things that absolutely surprised me, like we all understand that riding off with the side stand could cause a crash, right? So if you get on a bike, and let's say every bike these days in Australia can't come into the country unless it's got a cutout switch on the side stand. But what happens is that those side stand cutout switches, because they're so close to the chain, they actually get filled up with grease, and the cheap little 50-cent pin that's supposed to, you know, pop out and tell you that the side stand's up gets frozen by chain lube, and people ride off with side stands down. And of course, as soon as you go into a left-hand bend, the side stand digs in and it spits the bike upright. And for us, that means a head-on. For you guys, that'd mean riding off onto the side of the road. So the way we manage the side stand in Australia is we basically, during teaching, say, as soon as you get on the bike, kick the side stand up and never sit on a bike with the side stand down. That's our kind of way to address the issue and get people into a good habit. What I found quite amazing in Japan was they actually walk up to a bike and kick the stand up before they throw their leg over. Now, that's really hard to balance the bike, you know, because you're actually trying to hold the bike, and if you're short like me, I'm 5'8", and on my dirt bike's a very high seat height. I would struggle to do that, but I can actually see the logic in why they teach it that way, because it means that if you get in the habit of always kicking up the stand before you actually throw the leg over, there is no way you'll ever ride off with that stand down, right? But the method we do in Australia, where you throw your leg over, then sit down and kick the stand up, you could get distracted talking to a friend, whatever, or just be sitting there, you know, decide to have one last cigarette before you ride off or something, and forget that the stand is down, and then ride off and cause a problem. So, I mean, that's a very simple one, but it's just how different cultures look at different things. I suppose another example is that all our low speed manoeuvring, we basically teach manipulating the clutch friction point and using a bit of rear brake with a little bit of throttle. And in Japan, and we basically say if you're doing a tight U-turn, or if you're riding, you know, under 5 miles an hour, or for just manoeuvring in a car park or something, then you really don't, for those very, very, very low speeds, don't need the front brake. You're better off just working on the back brake. Whereas in Japan, they actually teach them that a good rider should have a high enough quality of control on the front that you can do all that work on the front. And you can do all that work on the front. You can do all that low speed on the front. But it does have, you know, it can destabilize you a lot quicker, particularly if you're on a light, loose surface, you're a bit harsh. So they just have a higher expectation of your skill level. The skill level of the coaches in Japan is insanely high, insanely high. I took a couple of our coaches over there for their, at the time I was with Honda, and they have an international coaches riding competition. And we took our best riders over there, and they weren't even close to the Japanese riders. If you get on YouTube and have a look at some of their instructor, their coach competitions, just mind-boggling what they do with motorcycles over there. So in terms of skill levels, so, yeah, it's an interesting cultural difference.
Did taking some of your best riders over there and getting that realization of how good the Japanese were, when you brought them back to Australia, were they able to start changing the culture, or did it just fall on dead ears?
No, it's really interesting because, you know, it's always good to look outside your own house. And it's always good to discover that you're not the best of the best of the best. There is someone down the road that's actually better. And when you realise that there is someone better, for many people it does inspire you to actually then develop yourself. And it certainly did lift the bar in Australia. There was a lot of people that came back and really realised they need to develop their riding skills. I'm not saying that our riders are no good, they're actually very good. But when you actually compare yourself to a country where the standard of, I mean, much of it's range work, much of it's skills that you would use really only on a training range. So for example, you know, they do stuff like ride over very narrow, 2-inch planks and up and over seesaws and stuff. And you know, when I ride down the road, I don't find a lot of seesaws that I have to ride over. But it's a lot of the things that they use as discipline to develop balance and extremely good levels of control over accelerator and brake. So their balance and their control skills, I would honestly say, second to none. But having seen it and taken videos there and having come back to Australia, there were certainly a lot of people here that really then did a lot of work to lift their skill levels up. We then sent a group back to compete in following years, and we did a lot better because we actually understood the standard that we were trying to get to. They're still better than us.
I spent some time in Asia myself, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, Thailand, and I was amazed at the competence of all the riders over there. Just, you know, the normal riders on the street, because that's their major form of transportation. And it also helps that, you know, they basically grow up on 2 wheels. And I've said this many times before, when you look at a 125cc scooter, for lack of better terms, and it's got 1 kid on the handlebar, 1 kid on the gas tank, and then the father who is holding the handlebars most of the time, but the kids are, you know, they got their hands on them too. And in between dad and mom, who's on the back, is the baby. And there's 5 of these people going down the road. And by the way, they're carrying groceries. You got to wonder about, you know, how they develop and be so good. It's because of the experience of spending their life on 2 wheels. And I know here in the United States, that isn't so. We look at motorcycles as sport or entertainment. It's not looked at as transportation as much. And because of that, our culture and our policies are affected by it. So I get what you're saying, and maybe we should have a more globalist view by checking out what other people are doing it and sharing it where we live. I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think Australia, Canada and America are very, very similar in our usage of bikes, and same with New Zealand and other countries, I suppose, that have got the space to go and use them recreationally, and also the economic situation that people can afford motorcycles as a recreation rather than the sole mode of transport for a family. Certainly, I don't know if you guys caught the closing roundtable session of the International Motorcycle Conference, but one of the things they mentioned there was the fact that, you know, for most of Europe, motorcycles are for commuting. Now, I would say that Australia and America, they're not primarily a commuting machine, they're actually more a recreational machine. Certainly, there's a percentage that does commute, but you know, for Europe, it's a major commuting tool, and it's seen as a you know, transport mobility option. And I think that's the thing that's changing. Certainly with COVID, Don would have seen the information on our bike sales that I posted on our National Instructor webpage. We've had a huge explosion in second-hand sales, bike sales, ride train, all under COVID, because people are now using them as a mobility option rather than purely as a recreation, because they've moved away from our public transport system because they're afraid of, you know, catching the COVID on the train or on the bus. And so I think things are making us change, and it's an interesting time for us in motorcycle land, I think.
We have the very same thing going on. And the one thing I did note on your statistics, though, when I saw you post them, it seems as if, except for one set, your crash statistics have gone down. And I don't think that is playing out here in America. We definitely have an increase, but preliminary discussions have shown me that the crash rates are actually going up because they're not trained.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, we're seeing car drivers, the crash rate under COVID's dropped 20%, and motorcycles have dropped about 8%. The only category that's increased in crash rates in Australia under COVID's been push bike riders and cyclists. It's actually up 70%, which is frightening. But we've also had a lot of what they're calling pop-up cycle bays, because the demand, you can't actually buy a push bike now in Australia because every single push bike's been sold because people are just, they need them to commute. And so, and we're just coming into our spring now. So spring started on the 1st of September for us. And so people are getting on push bikes and cycles, you know, cycling to work. And that's actually playing out in a massive increase in road trauma. But interesting in the motorcycle space, you know, we've seen this 8% reduction in crashes for motorcycle riders. At the same time, we've seen a 35% increase in the sales of off-road motorcycles. And I think it's about 30% increase in the sale of road motorcycles. So there's a lot more bikes getting bought. There's a lot more people riding them, but the crash rate's reduced. And I suppose there's that argument about when there's enough critical mass, people start to see motorcycles and actually look out for them on the road, which I think is very much the case in Europe and Asia, where there's a lot more bikes commuting. So people are a lot more aware when they drive their car of actually making decisions at intersections where they're checking for riders. So it's an interesting effect. I don't know what's happening in America, though, if you're increasing your crash rates.
I had a conversation this week with a young guy. He contacted me as part of a school project in a class about writing magazine articles, which is a class he's taking. He contacted me to do an interview about motorcycle stuff. And I forget the exact question, but we got on the subject of tiered licensing and the like. And, you know, of course, in Japan, you know, they have a kind of regimented tiered system, which works really well for them. And I said, you know, I think it would be it's not a bad system, but I think there would be tremendous pushback in implementing something like that here, where everybody's, you know, I got to get the biggest, fastest, largest, et cetera. And how would such a thing even happen here with our culture? You know, so I you know, I could kind of see it as a positive thing, but tremendous stumbling blocks in making such a thing happen here.
I think essentially what you're talking about is graduated driver licensing, and America's had GDL since the 80s when you introduced curfews and limits due to the issues there in a car sense. But I see GDLs as like being a good parent, where as your kid gets older and demonstrates more maturity and experience, you then give them less restrictions. So for me, that means is, you know, when my kids were 12, it'd be, you've got to be home before dinner. And then they were 14, I'd say, okay, you've got to be home before 8 o'clock. And then they were 18, I'd say, you know, you've got to be home before midnight, and now my son's 19, you've got to be home before Tuesday. So, you know, as they get older and they demonstrate and prove to us responsibility, experience, and the gaining of knowledge, then we as parents or supervisors could remove these restrictions. And it's the same about graduated licensing. It's about, as you progress with your experience and your gaining of knowledge, then we can ease restrictions. Now, in 2008, 2009, I introduced, I was then working for government, and I introduced graduated motorcycle licensing to New South Wales, and then 2016, I was on the project that introduced it to Victoria. So in the first two Australian states to get GDL for bikes, now we've got it in pretty well all Australian states except Western Australia. And essentially there's 3 or 4 stages, because you've got a learner stage, what's called a provisional or a probationary stage level 1, and then a level 2 probationary, and then a full license. And what happens under those 4 tiers of learner, P1, P2, unrestricted, is this gradual easing of restrictions. So for example, a learner and provisional riders, P1s, are restricted to what we call a learner approved motorcycle, which is a low capacity bike, which is under 660 cc's, but with a power to weight ratio under 150 kilowatts per tonne. So essentially it picks up, bikes that are really appropriate for novice riders. Now, as they progress in experience, a learner and a provisional rider aren't allowed to carry a pillion passenger, but once you've had your licence a year, you're allowed to then carry a passenger. You know, we've got 0 alcohol for all novice drivers and riders, so essentially you can't have any presence of alcohol in your system for the first 4 years of having a licensed car or bike. And obviously there's restrictions like mobile phone restrictions and limits on demerit points and those sorts of things. And all it is just a staged approach. Now, you know, there's some jurisdictions that have had it forever. We introduced learner licenses in 1954 and provisional licenses in 1966. So we've had a culture of it for 50 years. But, you know, having those stages is no different to what we do to our kids. You know, it's having those steps. And look, I'm a great fan of GDL, but down here we call it GLS, graduated licensing schemes. But GDLs for cars and bikes have proven without a doubt to reduce road trauma, particularly if you integrate that with training. So for us, we've got a course to get your learner's permit, then another course to get your provisional license, and then you move on. Now, Japan's also got a number of steps within the capacity limits. We only basically have 2 steps where we go learner approved motorcycle, and once you're on your unrestricted, you can ride anything. But when you actually look at the modern sports bike, there's no way I'd want a novice rider on a 600 sports bike. You know, it's just, they're weapons. You know, and I know civil rights and all the rest of it, but you know, it's like the helmet argument. You know, sometimes you actually do have to protect people from themselves.
Duncan,
That's my take on it.
Can you provide some commentary on how that was received by motorcycle manufacturers and sales entities in Australia, since you had a hand in implementing that graduated licensing?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I suppose, that it progressively over many years, some of these restrictions came along. So I suppose it's a little change here and nobody notices, and then another little change. But when we introduced in New South Wales the learner approved motorcycle scheme in 2002, we actually consulted with what we call the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industry, the FCAI. And we'd always had a limit since the mid-70s. We'd banned new riders from riding 2-stroke 250 road bikes like RGVs and KR1Ss and TSRs and those little pocket rockets, if you like, those. So we'd always had a ban on those, and we'd always restricted learners to 250 bikes. So what was interesting was we had this artificially created market where there was always a market for second-hand 250s because there was always learners needing to buy them. So what was odd is that you could, a second-hand 250 would cost more money than a second-hand 500 because nobody would want to buy a second-hand 500 because once people got off their 250 restriction, they would go straight to a 750 or 1,000. When we actually worked with the industry and said, okay, we're thinking of getting rid of the 250 restriction because what was happening is that the number of appropriate 250s was getting smaller because around the world there was less and less models getting made, and there were a lot of appropriate larger bikes like 600 cruisers that were actually really good bikes for learners and novice riders. Because if you're a big person who's 6 foot and quite heavy, a couple of 100 pounds, if you're a big person, then a little 250 is just ridiculous. And so we went to the automotive industry and said, we want to introduce this 660 capacity, but with a power to weight ratio. And they welcomed it. They thought it was great. So we actually worked with them to identify what bikes were appropriate. We essentially built a criteria in conjunction with them that the industry thought was great. The stakeholders, the motorcycle lobby groups and the motorcycle riding groups thought was great. It was an easing, if you like, of the old 250 restrictions. So I suppose that's what helped it get over the line because we were making the old 250 restriction a lot fairer. So if you were starting from scratch, I think it'd be a lot harder. I think the riding community would certainly push back because they have all these arguments. But it's about working with them and talking through those arguments, because I honestly think putting a new rider on 1,000 is basically signing their death sentence. And that certainly was what was happening in Australia in the 70s, because we were getting so many riders just going straight out of the motor registry with their license and then straight to the bike shop, buying a big capacity bike and crashing it within days. And so, yeah, something had to be done, and that's what occurred back then. So if you're starting from scratch, I mean, how many jurisdictions over there have got, what states have got restrictions on bikes for learners? 0.
And that's the thing. I mean, I get students in my classes all the time that have an 1100 cc, a 1300 cc. The salespeople steer them towards gigantic motorcycles. And, and frankly, some of them come out of the class with enough skills that if they're thoughtful and, make a good transition, that they could do that. But, in general, I think students are better served by starting out small. It'll be more forgiving of their mistakes and decide that motorcycling is for them. They'll move on. You can always sell a small bike. There's always a new rider looking to buy a small motorcycle. So the turnover part is pretty easy. And, I think there'd be fewer people that learn to ride, they buy a gigantic bike, they ride 3 times, they're scared to death, and then their riding is over forever. And, or worse, if they get hurt, and I think we can further people's riding, riding in their lifetimes by having them start small, but it's hard. After half the time people already have the bike by the time they get to us. Yeah.
Oh, look, I totally agree with you, Lynn. I found that so many people go to a larger bike and scare themselves and give away riding. And if the importers and the shops realise that your best customer is your repeat customer, and you're never going to get a repeat customer if you've killed them. You know, and number one thing is they should be trying to actually get something that suits their needs, not just get the biggest commission on the biggest bike. So, you know, I suppose it's a conversation with the industry and say, okay, we really want you to encourage and get people to start off on small bikes, and maybe you can have a voluntary code where dealers actually promote smaller capacity bikes. I mean, one of the things we had, and it's still culturally an issue, is that, and I hate it, is that people, you say to them, what sort of bike you've got? And they say, oh, I've only got a 250. And you know, you almost have to berate them and say, what do you mean only? You know, it's a bike is a bike, and a good bike is one that makes its rider happy. And,
You know, I
and if
try
you
to,
have,
sorry, go ahead.
you're right, no, go for it, Lynn.
I was going to say, I have a lot of occasions where I try to promote very accomplished riders I know that have small motorcycles. And, you know, I talk about, gee, I've got a rider coach friend in Kentucky. He's got a big bike for touring, but he commutes on a 250 Ninja, you know, or this rider coach that knows the heck how to ride and put 72 miles on a bike in a parking lot so she could get really familiar with her new ride. Or, you know, this bike that he bought a 250 whatever, and he's still got it. It's been 15 years, but he likes his 250. It works out really well for him. So, you know, to give people kind of permission that small bikes are okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, it takes a good 3,000 miles to get used to a new bike. And I mean, I've just sort of noticed that over the years. I find that unless I get about 3,000 miles under my belt on a new bike, I kind of, you know, I'm still a bit wary about it. And to be a new rider and jumping on something that's a large capacity bike and expecting to be able to ride it confidently is just insanity. You know, and I think it's just, you know, our job as coaches is to promote motorcycling and promote its safety and get people, you know, enjoying them safely and appropriately. And I think there's a lot more we could do to encourage people onto the right choices.
Well, there's a lot of issues with the culture itself here in the States. You know, I just had a student, he's already bought his bike. Clearly he could ride. He's been riding for about 3 years, but he's got a bike that is, he's got a 600cc sport bike that definitely speaks to, you know, my preference for machine. But he talks about how his son looks at it and is scared. He's like, it's just a 600. Like you don't, I mean, my wife's bike is 0 to 70 in first gear in a very short amount of time. So convincing them that CCs do not equate to skill sets is a hard sell, but it's one that I work on every time I coach, every single time, whether we're supposed to or not.
Well, and that's compounded by the problem that a lot of people's manufacturer of choice doesn't make anything that's not gigantic CCs or isn't going to anymore.
Such as, name your brands on that one, because I think I know where you're at with that. I agree, but you know, you can get a 300cc sport bike for next to nothing these days, and I mean they'll just skip that because they feel like they're going to be looked at differently. But I'm curious to hear what you were going to say next.
Well, I'm thinking about Harley specifically, and so my next question for Duncan was going to be, what manufacturer has the biggest market share in Australia?
Without doubt, Honda. Honda have the biggest market share, and particularly in the road bike space. I mean, the 4 Japanese manufacturers tend to lead the charge. You know, so Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki tend to be the lion's share of bikes. I mean, we certainly have in the large capacity bikes, Harleys and BMWs have a very strong presence. But you're exactly right about Harley not making, I mean, we've got the Sport 500 and it's actually a learner approved bike, but it's expensive. Like it's really expensive. And I suppose it's just, you know, there's other cheaper options. Certainly a lot of people aspire to Harleys because they are the cruiser to have, you know, so it's, I'll say Japanese Harleys, you know, the cruisers of the Japanese manufacturers, a lot of people will start off on those, like Yamaha Virago XVs and things like that, or Honda Shadows and the like. But, you know, once they get experience, they all want to have Harleys because it's just, you know, that's nothing like Milwaukee muscle.
A lot of our programs,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, a lot of our training programs that are run through Harley use that Street 500 as a training bike. And rider coaches kind of universally hate those as a bike to learn on.
Well, yeah, because I mean, for one, like we're gonna put the exhaust here, or we're gonna put the foot pegs here. Well, now we're out of time. Release.
What's interesting is in Australia, the bike that's almost become the universal training bike is the Honda CB125, because they are cheap as chips, and they are such a forgiving learner bike. It doesn't matter whether you're 5'2" or 6'1", you can get on a CB125 and ride it and feel confident and learn. And what's interesting too is that I'd actually argue you develop your skills far quicker when you have an under capacity bike that you're trying to get the most of, rather than a large capacity bike that you're trying to, you know, not freak yourself out with. It's really interesting. I remember back in the mid-'80s when I first got into training, I was riding a GPZ 900 Ninja at the time. 84, and loved that bike, and I thought I rode pretty well. But then I started with a training provider that was teaching motorcycle posties in Australia. We have the mail delivered by posties that ride 110cc Honda. I think you guys call them Cubs, but for us they're CT 110s. And I discovered that, you know, I went around one of our racetracks trying to follow one of our instructors, one of our senior coaches, and he was riding one of these little 125s around what was Amaru Park Raceway. And I was on my 900 and I couldn't keep up with the guy. and it made me realise if you can make a small capacity bike go well, your skills, you know, develop so much faster. And you know, when I got into motorcycle racing, that's why I started in 250 production racing in two strokes, because, you know, rather than go a large capacity bike, I found that if you can control a small capacity bike, so they're a much better training option. I mean, the CB125s, people sort of look down their nose at them, but, you know, students don't get hurt on them. Students can drop a bike, you know, and just pick it up, and they don't, you know, they don't have these giant drop the clutch wheel stand things where they, you know, hit the side of a building. They're just, you know, since we used to use Honda CB250s, a lot of those we used in training, and they got a little bit dearer, and a lot of the manufacturers moved to the 125s, and with the step from the 250s down to the 125s, injuries during training just dropped massively. So we very, very rarely get someone drop a bike or hurt themselves in training anymore in these days with these bikes.
The smaller bikes require that you actually ride them, while the larger bikes, I used to do street instruction in New York City, and I get people that, well, I can't take the road test on my big bike because you can't do the circles and figure eights on the big bike, but you know, they come to do a lesson before their road test on our smaller bike, but they were so used to just letting their big bike idle around turns that they didn't actually know how to ride. We'd have to take a step backwards because the smaller bike required that you give input to the controls to make it operate. And the big bikes, in a way, allowed them to cheat in a manner that they didn't really know what they were doing, which is too bad.
Yeah, one of the things we do in training, a lot of riders I find use that they've got poor clutch control, and so they use acceleration to mask their poor clutch control. And so one of the activities we have them do is to take off using the clutch only with the bike at idle. And so if you've got a 125 and you're a big boy and you're trying to let this get this bike moving without any accelerator and you're just doing it on clutch control, it requires a lot of skill, you know, and a lot of finesse in the clutch. And people say, oh, I can't do it. And then you go, well, I'll show you, you can do it, you know. And once they actually learn that level of clutch control to get moving and to do their gear changes, they're astounded, because they've, particularly riders that have come from an off-road background where their whole strategy to control is just give it more gas, you know, and it's just, yeah. I find the best thing to actually develop those skills of those riders that come to us who come from off-road riding and they're getting a license is constantly force them to go slower. And you say, slow it down, because they've just relying on speed for stability. Whereas if you actually force them to, you know, drop down to 10 mile an hour in second gear and little throttle, then they actually have to use correct posture and good technique, you know. And it's really, I think the best thing at training is little bikes. I love them.
I live in a rural area, so we have a lot of people that transition from dirt bike riding to street bike riding. And I tell them, you know, part of the fun of riding in the dirt is jumping on the gas and roosting your friends and spreading some dirt around. But when you do that on the street, you go. So, you know, you're going to have to transition into a little bit of finesse and fine tuning. And that becomes part of their fun challenge as they go through our basic course.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people say to me they like teaching people who've ridden before because it's easier. But the funny thing is, I think in many ways it's hard to get bad habits out of dirt riders, particularly their head position and where they look, because they're so busy looking at the rock they're about to hit that's 10 foot in front of them. They're not looking, you know, 30, 40, 50 foot up the road like they should be. And of course, when you're looking down like that, your balance is rubbish. So, you know, it's really, in many ways, the challenge, I suppose, with the dirt rider is to actually get them to think at a speed and a smoothness that is needed for the public street.
So this all kind of is a good segue, I think, to the final question I asked last week at Happy Hour. We've had Duncan give quite a, you know, broad overall of how things work in Australia and possibly some ideas about how ideas from Australia could improve in the United States. So the question was, if you were king for a day, designing a system of riders' education here in America, how would you go about it? Taking into consideration all the stakeholders that are a part of what we do in this industry. And I'll just kind of let that set for a while as we conversate for the rest of the next hour. Or queen. I don't mean to say that, you know, you can't be in charge as a queen. Whatever you like to be. Everybody got real quiet. Sorry. And while you're formulating that, oh, Robin, you gonna jump in finally? What?
I mean, I'm going to jump in for a split second. I don't know if my camera's on. I was riding around on my scooter at 8 miles an hour, which is the speed limit here, with my DOT-approved sun hat. I think what I was going to ask you, I think you're talking about if we were to come up with a tier level license system. Is that what you were asking?
I was not asking if it would be a tier level. I was asking what you believe would be the best way to set this stuff up. If tier is part of it, or the GDL, Graduated Driver's Licensing System, which isn't implemented, I'll try this again, is not implemented as well as it possibly could be here in America. How would you go about setting up a system to get riders better trained have more knowledge and more importantly, to reduce crashes?
If I'm jumping in, and feel free to step on me, I would say that I would love to see something which matches the current tobacco and firearms and alcohol sort of thing line up with it, where anybody under 18 has a limit of specific torque output or 500 cc's or less. Anybody 21 or less, or anyone 21 or less, they can go higher than that, but if they get any reprimand at all, they're bounced to a tier system as sort of not really punishment, but observed problem solving. Like, okay, well, you had an issue, so you are immediately going to have to earn a tier level license. And anybody over 21, we could, keep them in line with where we're at now. And then we just start with that, see what happens.
Pros and cons by anybody?
That sounds
Just
pretty-
my-
I kind of gave this some thought during the week, and I really didn't have any great ideas come to mind. But as we've been talking today, the idea of maybe having the dealers get steered towards directing new riders towards smaller bikes. I mean, I know
Oh yeah, oh my God, yeah.
bottom line, but they get the repeat customer thing, and I don't know if there's a way to facilitate that.
I think that is a very good idea. And when Duncan was talking about how they're set up in Australia, I was thinking you do want the return customers. If you sell them a large motorcycle, you're getting an immediate return, probably not that much more than selling a smaller CC bike. But what you get is the second and third stage purchases down the road. So you far exceed what you would get with one purchase if you have threes and you're taking care of the customer and they're graduating from their 125 to their 300 or 500 and then to the 600 and above, 750 to 1,000 cc or greater bikes. I think from a business perspective, if I was selling motorcycles, I would like 3 or 4 sales over just one that never comes back. Because each one of those sales also is selling other merchandise like personal protective equipment and, the t-shirt that goes along with it. So every return to the store, I get something more.
And referrals, gee, I just bought a new bike. Where did you get it? I got it at this place. I had a great experience, and more people come through the door.
And you also create a good second-hand market where the dealer can trade back the old. You come back with your 125 and say, I want to trade it in on a 500, then the dealer trades it back in, but of course when they sell that second-hand 125, they can make a profit on that as well. So because not everybody's got the money to buy a brand new bike, so if the dealer's got a good second-hand stock as well of relatively new, low miles, good quality, well looked after bikes, the dealers make it in lots of ways. It's and as you say, each time they come back to upgrade their bike, how about doing some training now? You've got that larger bike. Why don't you consider a refresher course now that because it's going to be different to what you were on. So.
And just add it to the cost. Any other ideas? Does anybody see problems with?
I wanted to say something in support of Robin's idea there, in that we did a lot of data analysis on the relative crash rate related to age, and the over 25 motorcycle crash rate, if you call that a base level, the under 25s were 5 times more likely to be involved in a crash, and the under 21s were 7 times more likely to be involved in the crash. So, yeah, there is clearly a correlation between age and crash rate of new riders, and it's not just an experience-related thing, in that this even takes into account first-time riders are in their 30s. So it's a combination of, even if you're a first-time rider in your 30s, you've got a little bit of road sense because you've been driving, and you've got a little bit of, you've got responsibilities, you've got family and friends that you consider, and work and all the rest of it. So you've got, if you like, protective factors. But certainly looking at under 25 and under 21, and I know Robin talked about under 18s, and I know that's very, very linked to the way you guys do your alcohol laws and the like. But I think with I'll call them minors, people under 18, I think the world lets us be a little tougher with those riders. They let us, do things like make mandatory helmet laws and things like that. So I think starting at the young end of town is possibly a good place to do this for 2 reasons. One, it changes the norm, because if your whole young cohort have to go through this process, it then becomes acceptable. The other thing is that it introduces a safety culture very early on in life. So if you have a barrier that says, okay, under 18, you're not allowed to ride more than an XYZ capacity, and under 21, you're allowed to ride this. If you did that and nothing else, you'd start changing the way people think about bikes.
And we may be able to actually, put some fine points in there, I think, of maybe you could test out when you show the competence that you have to ride a larger motorcycle or a different motorcycle. I think that's pretty cool. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, there are a couple of places around the world. I know Queensland, I also know Japan require tests on the larger capacity bike to actually remove that size restriction. And that's another thing worth jumping on Google and having a look at the Japanese unrestricted license test. There's a guy there's one particular clip there where a guy has a helmet camera on for the entire license test, and it's quite mind-boggling what they asked this guy to do on a 750, and that's just a standard license test to upgrade to an unrestricted license. So I think certainly barriers around that say, okay, you can ride up to here until you're actually assessed for competency at something bigger. There's a lot of merit in that, because certainly, it's a lot harder, as Lynn was saying, do a U-turn on a 1,000 than it is a 250, and a lot of people just struggle with it. And so if they're struggling with it, then should they be riding that on the road?
Good point. Sorry to steal the mic here, but I'm thinking to myself how there are a lot of riders here, like I said, they're competitive. They think that displacement equates to or stipulates skill set by buying, like they're buying their skill set, what they're projecting as what they're able to do. And then they may or may not crash. We were talking a little bit, Duncan, last time about the competitive nature. I had a lot of time to sit on this because now and then I'll drink during these things and just be blah, 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 and it won't make any dang sense until I listen back. I'm like, no, that did not make any sense, Robin. But I thought about how riders, kids are competitive. They want to impress. That is universal and always around. It takes a lot of years to realize, wow, I know nothing, and now I'll be impressed with myself if I can gain something. And I think we all kind of still do that from that point on. And my thought was, or the reason I worded it that way, oh, leave me alone, text people. The reason I brought that up was that it would be interesting if there were a way to bring that competitive nature into the class and curriculum without it, like as an option, without it influencing anybody who does not want to be competitive. That's a really tall order. It's a hard menu to build. But for anybody who wants to be like, hey, check out what I blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's your dumb trophy, whatever it is. And I don't mean in such exaggerated terms, but these are some of the things. You see all these different personalities coming to take a class. And some of them saw the movie where the CG did the thing that made the motorcyclist look like they could accomplish yada. And then they think they can do that. They don't need training. It'll never happen to them. The hurt will never hit their knuckles. And then they get a big bike, and then they become a pancake of their own accord into something that was inanimate and right in front of them, because they just don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with the result of their decision. And let me close this tab. So if everybody's going to be so competitive, how do we bring that down?
You
I know
know,
that
every time I can in the class, Robin, when students, are struggling with stuff, stopping with the bars turned, as an example, because it's a common error, I'll point out, imagine if your bike weighed twice as much as this bike, because most street bikes do. How's that going to work? And I try to bring them back to earth a little bit with, some reality checks about, hey, the mistakes that you're making, we need to not make, because they're easy to fix on this bike, but they're not going to be easy to fix on the bike that you're going to ride when you leave here. So we got to get on this right now and make it happen, because, in 2 minutes, you're going to be on a big bike that's laying on the ground.
Or maybe we just need to do a better job of reframing the license test as it stands now as something that's actually really pretty easy in comparison. And if the reason that you're in the class is because you want to be able to have a third-party examiner give you the test on our little training bike because you can't do the test on your big bike, then maybe that's a problem.
But
I like that.
I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that students come and take the class because they think it's easier than the road test, but it's not. It's not. It requires more of them, and we're tricking them into upping their standard by default, and they don't even know it, which is part of the beauty of it. But
well, think about it this way then too. One thing we're bringing in the picture here, we talk about, like, there are certain types of learners, right? Well, there's certain types of presentation that is desirable to a certain type of learner, and there's types of presentations that they have zero interest in, or just trying to get through the dang process so they can go hurry up and crash. So, a lot of people will say, how do we look at ourselves? This is the first time I'm going to say, how do we look at ourselves in a way where we are providing knowledge in a way that is desirable to obtain? Like, it's something they want. Oh, okay, that is a cool way to put it. It'd be nice if there was a little bit of a guidebook to that kind of thing, because relatability isn't always in our pocket. Sometimes
I think a lot of that relatability comes after the class. I mean, how many times have you have students who have finished the class and they're like, wow, I learned so much stuff. Holy crap, I can't believe all this stuff I didn't know, and these great tips that I came away with. And how do we get that information out before the class that, hey, if you come take this class, you're going to learn all this great stuff, and I try to use a little bit of social media, but I'm still new at that. And
yeah, sure.
Be not the best at.
So then, here's one then. So, like, Duncan, sorry to cut you off, Lynn, but I just
that's
have
right.
to say, Duncan, do you ever get the kid that rolls in like, yo, I just got a motorcycle permit, I'm gonna get an R6, yo? Do you get that kid? Do you get that particular student? And what do they sound like where you are?
Well, for starters, we never say yo. Sorry, mate. Look, the kid's the same without the yo. We absolutely have that kid that just turns up and thinks they're just going to go out and, they've illegally already purchased the R6 or the CBR 600 or whatever. They've already got it there, and some are arrogant enough to turn up riding it to the training centre there to get their learner's permit, and you just say, for goodness sake, at least hide that thing, otherwise I'll call the cops. There's always going to be that attitude. But I think there's a lot of things that you can do to inspire the competitive spirit, but at the same time, make them realise they're not everything they think they are. So one of the things we sometimes do is just have a slow ride on the 125s and have a competition who can take the longest from point A to point B and maintain a straight path. And then sometimes, particularly if it's a provisional course, you'll say to them, now do it on your own bike and see how you go. And they realise that on their larger bike that they just can't do it. They just haven't got the skills.
Oh,
And
the turning
they
radius
realise,
is the curve of the earth, you know. And then they're like, oh wait, I'll be back after I go a long way around, you know.
yeah, exactly. And you know, you ask them to do a U-turn and they're so afraid to lean the thing over to get to the edge of the tyre to actually get it to full lock. So I think you can challenge them on things that, and throw the gauntlet down of competition around things that really highlight the problems with a larger bike. You know, and when you look at those low-speed manoeuvres and those technical things, large bikes are just a pain. And so if they actually come to that realisation themselves, then you can talk yourself blue in the face trying to tell them about it. But if they experience them themselves, and as Lynn was saying, you know, with people who say, can I use a smaller bike for the test? You know, somewhere down in their subconscious, they realise that they don't have control of that big bike.
We had we had a really, really small class where I am recently, where we ended up with just 3 students left. They all did a good job, but it just kind of went that way. So we did some demos on our big bikes a couple of times. That was fun. I had the competitive edge on myself. We all have it a little bit, I would suppose. Anyway, I hope that didn't go on.
I had a coach a few years back, and he every time a learner said that they couldn't do the U-turn on their bike because it's a 6.1 metre box that you have to do a U-turn in, and so what's that, 18 foot or something. And anyway, every time a learner would whinge and say it was impossible, he'd duck over to the garage and grab his gold wing. And then do the U-turn in on his gold wing, and it would always shut everybody up because, you know, you're looking at a pretty large bike there, and you know, it comes down to skill really. And
yeah, I've got a disaster of a friend up here named Mike Dunn, and he's like a borderline trials rider. So the students will say something like that. He'll range aid when he can't coach, right? We'll have 3 ranges side by side, and one range will be clear. And Mike will be over there, nobody on the range. They've taken their break. And I'm talking to my students, and Mike Dunn would be over there. He'd be doing figure 8 slowly on a TW200 between the start cones of the brake chute. Like, go ahead, tell me you can't do that.
Yeah.
Nicole, you didn't hear that. It's top secret information.
I heard nothing.
It's fun to watch.
So this brings up.
I heard nothing also, Robin.
Oh, I mean, Christopher, I bribed Christopher, so that's all taken care of already, so we're good.
So does everybody know who David Lee Roth is by chance? Or is there anybody out there that doesn't know who he is? Maybe that's the better question. Always ask about
I
it.
understand he's from Panama, right?
Rider coaches are all old, remember, Don? Of course we know.
Not all of us. I was listening to an interview of him today with Joe Rogan. If you're familiar with Joe Rogan, he's supposed to be a comedian, but he's more of a DJ or a commentator on American boxing. And they were talking about the differences in music in comparison, of course, Van Halen and what Van Halen did over their careers, even with all the different lead singers. And he was very, very good to Sammy and how he spoke about him. And he was talking about the 10,000 hour rule. Is anybody familiar with that? Duncan is. Anybody else? Duncan, what's your understanding of it?
I was actually just reading a book on the 10,000 hour rule, and it was actually talking about how the Beatles became so expert at their equipment because when they went over to Hamburg at the very early part of their careers. They were just basically playing 8 hours a day at these dingy clubs, and so by comparison to other musicians of their age, because they'd reached that magic 10,000 hour point where they've had so much experience. 10,000 hours is what they deem people to be experts at, and or get expertise by. And this similar thing was around about Bill Gates and his amount of practice, and same with Steve Jobs before they actually, they were so young, and yet because of their life opportunities, they got these enormous amounts of practice, which made them, as I say, expert level proficient. And so it doesn't matter whether it's music or technology or whatever your passion is. There's just, once you get to that magic 10,000 hours, you get that extra level of skill set.
I believe I've read that same book. I just wish I could remember what the title of it was so we could share it with everybody.
I think it's something, The Subtle Art of Not, is it that? I've read that recently.
No, I don't think that's it.
I'll go back. It's in the other room. I'll grab it later and try and
It's
get a few books out there.
What was interesting is when David Lee Roth was talking about the Beatles in this particular conversation, I believe he said there are those that go well beyond the 10,000 hours. There's the 30,000 hour rule. And that's basically what he thought Van Halen, and he didn't compare Van Halen to the Beatles, but he said the Beatles certainly, they were 30,000 hour people. And the reason is they all played covers before they even got close to writing their own music. And you can look at any sports figure who is exceptional. It takes that amount of time for the experience to develop. And so when I was thinking about that, my mind naturally, although I dabble in music and dabble in other things just like everybody else, my mind automatically goes to, well, how do you become a really good coach? How do you become an even better writer? How do you become a better teacher? And the bottom line is we all have to put in the time. You have to put the hours in. You have to study outside of just going to a range, or outside of just going to the classroom, or outside going to one PDW a year. And so I thought that was very revealing. And your discussion, of course, just made that pop right back into my head. So it must be almost relevant. Any questions?
Any one of us can identify coaches that have been teaching for a long time, but that are not superlative coaches. They're kind of marking time and they're getting the job done, but they haven't elevated themselves or progressed to a higher level.
And I don't want that to sound wrong either. There are coaches out there that put the time in and they live this as much as they can, or more than they should sometimes. We all know them. But I think as a collective, we could probably do a much better job at it than we are collectively right now. Rita made a great comment, and that's not 10,000 hours boring holes through the air on the interstate. No, that's 10,000 hours being a coach, or 10,000 hours of practicing out on the range, or out on a track, or whatever, trips your trigger. And as Duncan said earlier, all of them, we need to have that taste. We need to be, what'd you say? I wrote it down because it was so good. But
Bilingual.
Yeah, bilingual, there you go. Or multilingual, really, not just street bikes or dirt bikes or road bikes or on the track. The more, the better. Quality.
But 10,000 hours boring holes on the interstate, that's the same kind of student that would relate to those coaches who coach tons and tons of classes, but don't seem to be any better than the day they walked out of Rider Coach Prep.
Exactly.
Get those students who come to an advanced class or a BRC2 and say, oh yeah, I put on 15,000 miles a year. And when you ask them where they go, oh, I ride the interstate to rallies. And then they get on the range trying to do BRC2 exercises or advanced exercises and can barely turn their motorcycle around.
It has to do with motivation. I've got 3 nieces and a nephew, and the nieces are all kind of programmed to be high achievers. If they get a 98 on a test, they're like, oh, I wasn't perfect. And the nephew's like, B is good, so, we have a little disparity in what the end goal is. And I think there's a lot of coaches that are in the B is good category. And what can we do to bring them up to speed?
I do not have a response to that.
So I made 2 guesses here. I could be wrong. This is the first one. Could that be it, Duncan? I can't hear you.
Let's try that with the mute off. Yes.
I thought this was the other one. I think it's mentioned in here too.
Yeah, no, it's the first one. Focus.
All right. I knew I seen it.
I think part of encouraging coaches to want to be better is to exhibit ourselves wanting to be better. So if there's opportunities to talk about things that we've done to become better coaches, professional development, reading a book, or I read something somewhere about X, Y, and Z, just that we're not in that bubble of the only time I think about coaching is when I'm actually on the range coaching, is a good thing.
So that brings up this week's challenge. What a segue. So Robin actually got me thinking about this because he posted something.
I have no response to this.
That's all right. I'm not gonna share the text between us. But he posted something. I thought, that was good to listen to. That was great to watch, and we all like those little YouTube or Vimeo things that we see that brings knowledge to us. But the thing that got to me as I was watching is, man, he's repeating themselves over and over again. It was like somebody who reads the cards and then talks you through it and then asks you if you have any questions and then does a demo and asks you, hey, do you have any more questions? Make sure you do this. It's like the cards coming back to you 4 or 5 times and taking 14 minutes where, a 4-minute spiel probably could have done a good thing. So then in my brain, I'm thinking, how can we help each other out, help other rider coaches out a little bit more? And so here's the challenge to whomever accepts. Don't feel obligated, but if you don't, I'll hunt you down. Find a coaching tip that you think is worthy of sharing with other people. And the goal is, how do you relate that information on a video like I'm talking right now in less than 3 minutes? And the premise for this comes from education, where they were challenging people to come up number one, with an elevator speech, this is what I'm about, and this is what I'd like to share with you. And number two, for people that were doing thesis work or dissertation work, being able to explain to somebody they've never met before in less than 3 minutes what their thesis was. So what I have found, having to like throw through like dozens of these videos, is that if you can speak it in 3 minutes, you're probably speaking the exact right amount of detail, the right amount of information, and somebody doesn't get bored and walks away from it. So the challenge is a 3-minute thesis on some coaching tip or coaching aspect that you would like to share with other people. And if you need assistance, reach out to somebody to maybe go over what you're talking about, or certainly you can reach out to me. I'm always available. But I think if we do a small number of these, we can post it on the website and let people who don't always come to Tribe Talk have access to them, sort of like Tribe Talk tidbits that I talked about a little while ago. I think maybe we can make a difference in training our peers and maybe training ourselves. Because if anybody saw the pyramid, I forget who posted it, Josh maybe posted a pyramid. One of the best ways to learn things is to share it with other people. So am I getting any pushback on this? I can't tell. You guys are like, you're crazy.
I'm just going to make mine a council out.
A council? Hey, you know, that helps. People want to know how to counsel out students, not yourself
Look,
as a
kid,
coach.
You suck. And I think you should go home. Also, you're just heinously unattractive, generally. And I can't you have in this class anymore. You need to just be not here. So you're bad at this, and you were genuinely unattractive. Go away. Okay, I hate your face.
And you're never going to ride motorcycles, so there.
Yes. You might ride a unicycle in a circus. Good luck.
I think this might be more than a 1-week assignment, but I like the idea of it very much.
Well,
So,
let's see where we're at in a week then. Go ahead, Nicole.
your talk about compiling videos and putting them out there kind of has me thinking of one aspect I would like to see if I was queen for a day.
Oh.
And that is for every rider education program to have top tier marketing. Because I don't think we do a good enough job of marketing, and I'm no marketing expert, so I'm not the solution, but I think one of the problems I see is that we don't have good enough marketing for rider education.
Nicole, just for you, I'm going to put together a monster truck ad for the Illinois department. Sundays, all weekend. I'll make it happen.
So Nicole, your 3-minute video should be on what good marketing would include from a layperson's point of view.
I don't know about that.
Look, we're already helping each other out with this. I love it.
And you know, I'm old. I feel like I'm really out of the loop about where young people get their information from. I really have no idea. You know, I know where I get my information from, but I don't know about other people.
Yeah, I know I'm a
YouTube.
marketer's nightmare because I am so successful and adept at avoiding marketing messages.
But who here has been to IRETS? And for Duncan, IRETS is the International Rider Education Training System workshop thrown by the Motorcycle Safety Foundation here almost every year. We didn't have one this year. And saw the marketing presentation that was given. Anybody? Was it good, Lynn?
Again, I'm old. Maybe I'm slow to adapt. I'm still learning about the whole marketing thing. You know, my web guy, I have a web guy, and you know, he encourages me to be more out there on Facebook and Twitter and blah, 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 but I am not at the level he would like me to be. So I'm still working on that. I'm a work in progress.
You know,
I view those formats more, personally, I'm more of an information in mode on those formats rather than information out. So it's a diametric shift in philosophy for me to make them be information out, and I'm still struggling with that.
but I would tell you, just, from your presence here on Happy Hour and certainly during Tribe Talk, that if we just cut off, the bit of where you're speaking and present that, that's some great information sometimes. And that's also what kind of played into this, that, every one of us are capable of sharing something with somebody else that they can take away something from. And you always provide such great information to the conversation. I think this would be a great way for us to help each other out, spread some of the knowledge a little bit better, and practice these new skills that we're all trying to learn. And if we could do it for each other, then maybe we'll start doing stuff for students. Just an idea.
It's a cool idea. This is a cool one, but I'm trying to wrap my head around my own format because I'm thinking about the best one I've heard so far came from Jeff Alford, who now and then he'll just like burp something that is really useful. He came up with a thing for students. Look, if it stalls slow, you've released the clutch too slowly or too quickly, whichever. If it stalls fast, oh yeah, there it is. If it stalls fast, you relieve the clutch out too fast. If it stalls slow, you didn't give it enough gas. And it has worked several times. It's quick and to the point, and you can walk away from it, and it's a light bulb igniter for clutch control sometimes.
It is. That's a great one. And, with very little explanation, you get the point across. And that's the intent. How can we share something that somebody takes away a bit of knowledge with very little effort?
Ron's raising his hand. What do you got, Ron?
No, I was trying to wave at Rita. She's been harassing me.
I would never do that.
Right.
Robin's tip. The thing with Robin's tip, that as you coach more and more, to me the goal is to take all those tips and put them in your toolbox. And just like, a new mechanic, you have your basic tools and you can't fix a lot of things, but as you work in the craft and you gain more tools in your toolbox, you can find new ways to fix things. And the same with students. The more tools you have in your toolbox, the easier it is to come up with something that helps that student, something that fixes their problem.
And you're always still so excited about getting a new tool, right?
Well, the first tool that you have to have is the ability to listen to them. If you don't listen to them, all the other tools in your toolbox are useless.
Sounds like Ron's got his topic.
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Same as trying to fix a vehicle or anything. If you don't listen to it and diagnose the correct problem, then you can't fix it quickly.
As my father said to me as I sat upon his knee, he said, "Son, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Why do you suppose that is?"
Well, I believe that's because for equilibrium, we need our ears to hear stereoscopically and make sure that we can keep balance while walking.
Shut up, Robin. That was great. Thank you.
My dad always said 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth, in that proportion for a reason.
There you go.
Absolutely. Boy, I think I've hit almost everything that I put down to like touch upon tonight. You guys are awesome. I didn't even have to work at it.
We finally got you figured out, I guess, huh?
Probably not.
Okay.
Maybe so, because I haven't figured it out. Maybe the outside is easier looking in than the inside looking out. I will share one thing that I did figure out that I've been working on quite a while, if you guys want me to get a little deep with you.
Uh-oh, here we go. Go ahead.
So, you know, life has a lot of things that go on that makes us worry. And one of the things I've really been pounding on lately is trying to be present and in the moment. I guess that kind of goes back to what Nicole shared with us a while back about, you know, being with or being there, meditating, self-awareness, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the reading I have been doing lately specifically hits upon this. Does anybody know who Annie Leibovitz is? Who is she? Help me out here.
The amazing photographer, right?
Yes, the amazing photographer. So Annie Leibovitz had a life partner, and her name was Susan Sontag. Does anybody know who that is? She's an American philosopher and writer, and she wrote down in this book that I just finished, time exists in order that everything doesn't happen all at once, and space exists so that it doesn't happen all to you. When we are ill, the reverse of both things are true. Depression, trauma, and anxiety all shrink our temporal horizons and contract our sense of mental space. Feelings of hopelessness and fear foreshorten the future. The past and the present become more or less merged through dwelling on old hurts, and the inward turn of the mind means it feels as if everything is happening to you. And so the Don version of this is when we dwell too much on the past, the problems we've had, the things that have hurt us or made us angry, we are dwelling in the past, and it causes us depression, makes us sad, and there's no reason for that. When we think about the future, we're thinking about something that hasn't happened yet, and it causes anxiety. You know, what's going to happen? How am I going to deal with it? What are the second and third order effects of me worrying about the future? And so we have depression on one side. Here I go with this left and right hand thing again. I apologize. Depression in our past and anxiety in the future. If we want to be more whole or feel better, wouldn't it be better if we didn't do the depression, didn't do the anxiety, and just lived in the moment? Wouldn't that be really great? Because, and this is what spurred all this thinking. I was out riding last week, and I rode past a church Thursday evening on my way back from the Motorcyclopedia Museum in Newburgh, New York. And on the church sign, it said, "Stop worrying about tomorrow. You did that yesterday." And it really kind of had an impact on me. So that's the deep thing from Don this week, you know. Stop worrying about tomorrow. Did that yesterday. Depression is looking at the past. Anxiety is looking at the future. Enjoy the time we have together now. I promised I'm not going to cry.
Don, you sound very enlightened, and I'm wondering, have you heard of the book After the Ecstasy, the Laundry?
No, but I am familiar with laundry lists.
Check that one out.
if you know anything about ACA. What's the name of it again?
After the Ecstasy, the Laundry.
After the Ecstasy.
My college years were colorful, so I'm a little nervous about this one.
Why is that?
It was a joke.
Okay.
It's just about how those euphoric moments of enlightenment are more common than we think, and then comes the real work of how do you apply that to every day.
It is. We got to catching ourselves thinking about the things we shouldn't be thinking about anymore. It's easy to get caught up in the drama. And whenever I hear that in my mind, I think about the no drama llama. If you're familiar with kids' books. It must be funny. Lynn's laughing.
I'm gonna say, aren't brains amazing? How like a thought goes in and like goes 5,000 places and it comes out the other end and we have an idea from it.
Yep.
Cool.
Anybody see the little video that Mark Wing put up about the neurons connecting like within the last week? Got me going. I want to see more.
Well, there's another version that shows what's going on inside Homer Simpson's brain, and I don't think it adds up.
Donuts.
No, I think they showed like the two, I don't know what species of monkey, but they're picking bugs off each other's back and eating them. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. I've been on high book output lately. I'm going to have to slow down and start writing. It's really getting overwhelming and confusing. What did that come from? I can't remember, but it's so close. So we're down to 10 minutes, and I remembered the other thing I didn't write down, but I wanted to throw out there to see what everybody thinks. And the reason is I was on Retsorg this week, and it seemed like the one conversation that really caught my mind was how wrapped up around dragging feet or not putting feet on pegs got some people spooled up. And so I was just kind of going to throw it out there and ask what everybody thought about when you should put your feet up and why.
Don't you think you should give credit to the title of that thread? Because I think that was hilarious. Something about pet peeves don't make good pets or something.
Yeah, that was a great title. Who did it though? I'm trying to remember if it was. See, you're gonna make me jump on Retsorg to figure it out before we go there.
Well, here, I'll throw this out in the wind. I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I do find myself on the arches of my feet when I'm riding down the expressway. I'm sloppy. But so one of our podcast hosts, Tim Clark, is a beastly ADV rider. Like he goes over mountains. He creates the road that other people follow type rider. And I think it was 3 years ago that he rode what's called the Bucky in Wisconsin. Raise your hands if you know what that is, but it's basically a really great dirt run. They have a lot of natural resource roads that people are allowed to have access to. It's all single track. It's all single track. Very, very intense. And some people take it seriously, some people don't. Tim, his bike wasn't ready for it, so he jumped on a much smaller bike. He's a big dude. He jumped on a much smaller bike to ride it, and he uses a lot of dirt techniques, dual sport techniques. He let his left toe dangle. It caught something. It got wrapped under the rear wheel. And so he recorded 2 episodes of the podcast with a cast on. And actually, I think that's when he became one of our hosts. So just say what you will, but I'm going to put that right in the air. So, yeah, muting myself now.
That was actually sort of part of the discussion. It had something to do with the tibia and the fibula fracture. The title of the post was "Peeves Do Not Make Good Pets," So Laura was right on it. And it was posted by Jeffrey Brenton, who is a common poster, but I haven't seen him on Tribe Talk. So for those of you who know him or want to harass him, ask him why he hasn't been here. So what are your thoughts? Why do we put our feet up? When do we put it up? How should we be coaching people on the topic?
Students who are BRC students who are struggling with the when of where to put up their feet. I see a lot of students who are dragging their feet while they're going. And I'm like, well, if you're skimming your feet along the ground, you're working to balance. And you'd be better off taking steps instead of working to balance. You take the steps, and when you're ready, pick up your feet. Because if you're skimming your feet, you're already working to balance. And it's just adding an element of struggle for you on figuring out. And in general, I encourage the steps because they'll help you track straight. When you're ready and have enough speed, you can pick up your feet. If you're skimming your feet, you're already balancing. Get your feet up. So that's my thought.
Okay. Anybody else go?
I was thinking about balance in different terms, that it's much harder to balance with your feet hanging out and therefore your knees hanging out. Whereas if you can get them up on the pegs and get your knees into the tank, you're more likely to be able to balance.
Sticking your knees out in a slow speed environment does absolutely zero to assist anything. It does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. Well, another concept is, so I'm totally with you there, Nicole. I completely agree. The bike, here's another one. The bike has 4 inputs. It has 4 keys. You can spell all of the 4-letter words using hooves. So in order to dial that message in properly, you should probably have your hooves in the right spot to have the maximum potential for dropping F-bombs all you like. That, you know, you've got 2 pegs, 2 hand grips. That's it. That is the deal. So you need to be in a ready typing position for all the, yeah. And I know that Ms. Holland was going to say something. Oh, is she about to sneeze? You about to sneeze?
I was going to say that one thing that I find is effective in any circumstance with students that you want to do something differently than they're doing, and you've tried your other back pocket coaching tools, is to tell them that they're going to get points for that on the test. And if they're not putting their feet up on the pegs in a timely manner, they're going to get assessed points in evaluation 1 and 2.
If I see you take your knees off the tank, you are going home. Like, just ruthless coach.
One of my tools for the flailing knees is asking them if they've ever tried to carry a little kid who doesn't want to be carried and is flailing all over the place. And trying to carry that little kid who's flailing all over is very difficult. But as soon as that kid wraps himself around you, it's really easy for you to carry the child. If, you know, and comparing that and saying, look, your motorcycle is trying to carry you, and if your knees are flailing all over the place, it's just as difficult for your motorcycle to carry you.
I got so Christopher Rector's not in here anymore. Nicole will dig this. I got a complaint once from a student because I told him to stop doing Elvis. What? You're doing Elvis. Your knees are all over the place. Just chill out, man. Get your knees on the tank.
You know,
go home because you suck at motorcycle and I hate your face.
Students have their own internal sense of balance, you know, and when students wiggle and do the knee thing and go all crazy, it's because there's something in them that's saying, this is wrong, fix this. And you know, it's hard for them to undo that because that's their own physiology telling them, whoa, this is messed up, you got to fix this. And it's hard for them to undo that. And, you know, you can work with them, but I got to tell them, you know, hey, you know what, this is just your own thing. You got to work that. You don't need help to balance. I tell students, when you roll the quarter across the kitchen floor, there is nobody riding the quarter. And the quarter stays up because it's going. So you don't need to help. Just let the quarter roll and you'll be good. And, you know, they're not all able to apply that, but they have an idea in their head anyhow.
Do you think it's that, or could it also be that they are just so unfamiliar with the idea of balance in general, or putting that to use, that that is terrifying at first?
I think that's totally true. And I actually had a lady get counseled out of a class a couple of weeks ago. It was the wedding weekend, so I wasn't there, but she would not pick up her feet. She just couldn't get there. And the coaches advised her, go home, go ride a bicycle, get comfortable with two wheels. There's other people in her family that ride. Some of them have trikes. I've spoken to her since then. She's been working on the throttle and clutch and brake aspects of going to get her coordination down. But I said, really get comfortable on a bicycle, pedal around. She's coming back this weekend. I hope she can pick up her feet. You know, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think that's also part of it. And for some people, there's been a gap in there. I've ridden a bicycle and their brains and stuff might not be dialed into that. So
yeah, in my experience, older people in particular seem to have more of a struggle with the balance thing. And I think that's just because, you know, less of a sense of balance is kind of a natural consequence of aging.
I wonder sometimes if I were picking up motorcycling now, would I be awesome at it or would I suck?
I even have to tell students that sometimes, you know, if I was trying to do this at my age, I probably would totally suck.
I've got a couple of questions. Do you guys in your curriculum start off with an unpowered ride where you actually, one rider pushes the other rider and they balance the bike with the engine off?
In the olden days, yes, but no longer. So that was actually part of the curriculum once upon a time. And you could tell right away who had no balance and who didn't. I have some memorable memories about that. But nowadays, it's just like we expect the students to reflect honestly. Do they know how to ride a bicycle? That's one of the prerequisites. And we take it from there.
My other comment was around the idea of, because we still have that in the curriculum, and essentially if you can't get both feet up on that, you're out. And because you should be able to get both feet up with the engine off. And if you can't do that, then you're going to really struggle with the engine going. But my take on the balance thing, it's the old knee bones connected to the hip bone song, in that one problem is always manifested by another thing. And of course, the knees out is actually manifested by the arms, and the arms are manifested by the head, because in relation to the older people not having balancing, I think the reality is that we know all our balance is in our inner ear, and we use our eyes and our ears in combination as a calibration to get balance. And of course, the natural response is when we're stressed or tired or concentrating, we try and drop our head to shut out external influence. So, you know, if we're trying to read a book and someone's watching the telly, we'll drop our head to shut out that influence. And so for a person who's putting a lot of concentration in, obviously we're going to drop our head, and of course that's immediately going to affect our balance. And if you look at an older person, we're concentrating, but we're also at the same time a little bit stressed. And stress, of course, manifests itself by being stiff on the bike, and particularly with the arms. And just like Lynn's explanation with the quarter across the table, the reality is that the bike's front wheel has to constantly do that by itself. And if you're actually bolting the front wheel in place by keeping stiff arms, then you don't allow the thing to balance. And of course, by having stiff arms and not letting the thing balance, your only way to balance is actually by flapping your knees around. And so they're all linked and connected. And so my take on the knee thing is that you need to look up and relax your arms in order to be able to grip the tank. And that's all counterintuitive, of course, if you're scared and let's say 50 plus. I can say that. But you know, I think I think there's a real, for the most part, the encouragement should be as soon as the bike is moving, as soon as you are letting out the clutch, both feet should be up and the tank should be gripped and your arms should be relaxed. And the exception that is made to that is really only made when you have a person who is particularly short stature and physically can't maintain the bike anything except on tippy toes to get it moving. And so, I would say for the most part, people can have their foot on the rear brake, get the drive up, and if they've actually got the foot on the foot brake, they've found friction point, they've got a little bit of idle, as soon as they begin to ease off that rear brake, it'll start moving and then they can immediately get that left foot up. So, I'm a big fan of feet up really easy. The other time when to put your feet up is at the end of the day when you're having a drink.
The favorite part of the day, happy hour.
I haven't been able to crack one yet today. I'm meeting a bunch of people in Dripping Springs tomorrow to lead them back to Kerrville and run a ride for 3 days.
By the way, Robin, we'd like to hear about that next week, about how your ride brief went. Remember we had the discussion?
Next week. In fact, we're going to have a bonfire tomorrow night, and I'm going to have everybody not go anywhere until they've heard every word. But it seems they've read everything. I sent everything off I would use on a tour. And
awesome.
There was also some, I'll tell you all about it.
All right, great. I'm going to write a reminder. Lynn, you had something?
I was going to say, Duncan, your comments about being stiff and all that stiffness coming into the bike and not letting it balance. So, that's a conversation I have during our low speed maneuvers exercises. I tell them, you're trying to force the bike to turn, let the bike turn. And that's like kind of a weird thing to say, but you're putting so much energy and muscle into it that it can't do what it needs to do. You need to just allow it to do what it's going to do. Just relax and let it go. And that seems to work better for them.
I've gotten to the point where if they are hanging on too tight with their hands, I have them just do a ride around the range with their only goal to be to hang on as tight as they can with their knees and have as light of a touch on the hand grips as they possibly can and still be able to control the throttle. And just have them ride that lap with that being the only thing they have to concentrate on, and it seems to help.
About 20 or 30 years ago, I read a magazine. It was one of the motorcycle magazines. People could write in a question to the editor and they would answer. And one of the questions was, how tight should you hold on to the hand grips? And the answer, which has stuck with me and I share regularly, is hold on to the hand grips like you're holding on to a bird. Tight enough that it doesn't fly away, but not so tight that you squish it. And I thought, wow, that's about right.
So in my research, because anytime that one of those questions come up, I don't want to look bad. And so I had to go out and I started pouring through all the books that I have. I'm into Spiegel's book. I'm into, believe it or not, Lee Parks' book. And I was into Hugh's book and Motorcycling Excellence. I'm into the Rider Coach Guide. I'm looking everywhere for any reference as to when, how, where any of that should happen. And I will tell you, I even pulled out motor learning and performance. So the visual thing is talked about heavily in there, Duncan. But I only found 2 books outside of the Rider Coach, and the Rider Coach Guide gives you a little focus when to do it. But Bert Spiegel's The Upper Half of the Motorcycle has maybe a paragraph or 2 that you can relate to the topic. And then same thing with Hugh's More Proficient Motorcycling actually has a picture that kind of relates to it.
Correction.
It doesn't really go there.
Proficienter motorcycling.
Yes. Proficient motorcycling. So I'll give you those two references. I'm not going to give you the answer because I would very like somebody to come to tell me exactly why we should put our feet on the pegs with reference. And if you can't give me a reference, maybe something that actually talks about what having your feet on the foot pegs actually does, besides, you know, what we've discussed here tonight and what everybody's rambled on about in Redstone. It'd be really interesting if somebody could figure this out for us.
Are you suggesting that you could grip the tank without putting your feet on the pegs?
I'm not suggesting anything, Duncan. I'm saying...
Because all I've got to say is, have you ever ridden a horse?
Yes. Oh, I got to link you to something. Hold on.
So I will tell you that part of my preparation for this question tonight included a 2.5 mile walk with my wife, who is an avid horse rider. And we were talking about all the different saddles and where the feet and stirrups are and how you hold on to the horse and how it may have some bearing on the answer to this question.
Ask her if she's actually ever ridden an Australian stock saddle. And if she's ever ridden a horse with an Australian stock saddle compared to a US saddle with a pommel, she will know the absolute difference of why you need your knees.
She has ridden English, which is, I think, pretty similar to the Australian stock.
Totally different. Totally
Really?
different. Yeah, because an English saddle is a dressage saddle that doesn't have the wings that hold your knees in. Okay.
I'll ask.
Yeah, very, very, very different. And because I used to do dressage, but that's another story. The difference in the saddle and how it actually supports your legs totally changes the control you have over a horse. And like Lynn was saying, like Lynn was saying about the use of the throttle, I was taught to hold the reins like I'm holding 2 glasses of champagne. And if you actually, and you're trying not to spill them, and it's exactly the same. All of your control, you grip the lower half of the animal, just like you do with a motorcycle. All the force is put into your legs, so you can have maximum sensitivity in your arms, so you can do very, very fine movements. And you can't put fine movements through your arms and your hands if you're putting your weight on them.
I like
that. The horse will crash. Actually, the horse won't crash, the horse will chuck you.
You know, many years ago, I had an uncle. He had a dairy farm in New Jersey, and his family went on vacation to Montana. They came home, sold the farm, moved to Montana, and he had a ranch. They liked Montana very much. And
was this person by any chance a dental floss tycoon?
No, just a guy. And he showed us some pictures of them on a little vacation. They were on their horses, and they're on the side of a mountain, and there's this little ledge. It's about this wide, and they're walking on it, and it's like a straight drop down to oblivion, and they're on their horses, and I'm like, holy crap, that looks really scary. Were you worried about falling off? And he said, well, the horse doesn't want to fall. and you know, the horse is making some decisions about, you know, self-preservation along with the rider. And I thought that was an interesting comment, which we don't quite have with our motorcycles.
Oh, we do, because the bike actually doesn't want to crash. It actually wants to go straight ahead.
All right. I hate to be the killjoy, but I had to edit about 3.5, almost 4 hours worth of video this week. And if you know what that feels like, we're not going to go any longer tonight. And I apologize for people like James, who just showed up. But before I leave, I know we've covered a lot of stuff, I invite you to watch the discussion from last week. It was actually in 2 parts. And I know that even being a part of the first half, going back helped me to like digest a lot of the things we talked about. But more importantly, if you're involved with 3-wheel training and you deal with the Polaris Can-Am Riker at all, the second half of last week's Tribe Talk Happy Hour is something I absolutely recommend that you watch. And if you don't deal with those 3-wheelers, by all means, you should watch it so that you're prepared for what can happen, because it's not only a good discussion about the particular frame, body style, and vehicle. You can take what was discussed about on those particular machines and apply it probably to any modern motorcycle in some of the discussions at how the rider coaches were dealing with the machinery. So I found it very revealing. I watched it twice. So yes, an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes turned into 3.5 hours as I'm like sucking it all in. And I just recommend it. Likewise, I know I put a note out a little bit earlier in the chat. If you go to the RiderChoices reference library, I posted 2 new documents this week. They are the research that our wonderful guest, Duncan McRae, contributed to in Australia. And they're a little bit long, but you can learn a lot if you want to be the king and queen and set up how we do things here in the United States. Due out, 3-minute thesis, if you would please. And then the why and when and where do we put the feet on the pegs? I think that gives everybody something to think about for the next week. Last thing I have to say, you got something, Laura? You look like you want to talk.
I was going to say extra credit for music and dancing with the 3-minute thesis, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm going to do mine in completely an interpretive dance, strictly an interpretive dance. The whole thing.
It can be
no nudity though.
No nudity, no offense. It can be as simple as you just talking to your phone. But if you want to make it more interesting, 3 minutes, you can point out lots of things on a motorcycle. Or the thing I was thinking about for Lynn was I could take my phone out to the range and show how I step off 20 steps and measure what is what, because that was a discussion one time. What a simple, great tip to give to other rider coaches. The last thing I wanted to mention is Tribe Talk Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I'll come up with something really interesting for us to look at and then talk about. So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for being a part of the family, sharing your thoughts. Duncan, great to have you again from Australia. And don't take this the wrong way. I love you all. You give me inspiration and make me better. So thank you. And I'll see you next week.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Happy birthday, Ron.